We often think about new medications hitting the market as like the end of the story, right? The
Eh,
big finale.
Yeah, the big celebration.
But what if I told you that sometimes that's actually just the beginning?
Oh, yeah. That's when a whole new chapter opens up.
A whole new world of drama unfolds.
For sure.
And that's what we're diving into today.
Right.
We're going deep into the world of post-approval, regulatory challenges in the pharmaceutical industry.
That's right.
It's fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Getting that initial FDA approval is a huge milestone.
Oh, absolutely.
It
Yeah.
means at that moment in time, the data shows that the drug's benefits are outweighing the risks for its intended use.
Right.
But the story doesn't just end there.
Yeah.
Maintaining that approval and making sure the drug remains safe and effective as it's used by more and more people, that takes serious ongoing effort and a real ability to adjust to new information.
So it's like a constant evolution.
Really is.
That's what we're going to try to unpack today.
Okay, I'm ready.
And to help us really dig into this, we've got a super interesting case study that's laid out in a transcript.
Okay, a real-world example.
We'll be using that as our main guide, and we'll also be pulling in some insights from all sorts of pharmaceutical development and regulatory affairs literature.
Right, so we're combining real-world stories with the academic side of things.
Exactly. It's like getting a backstage pass to see how companies deal with all the complexities that pop up after a drug is already out there in the market.
And most importantly, how they overcome those challenges.
Right, because there are always challenges.
Oh, for sure.
So for everyone listening, our mission today is to really understand the strategies and the problem-solving approaches companies use and those key lessons they've learned
Exactly.
when they run into these regulatory hurdles after their drug is already available to patients.
Makes sense.
We'll also be looking back at some big historical examples to give us some context.
Oh, yeah, those are really important for understanding how we got to where we are today.
Exactly. They show us how the system has changed over time.
Right, because it definitely hasn't always been this way.
Okay, so let's start with a basic question.
Yeah?
Why is there so much scrutiny even after a drug gets approved? The FDA gave it the thumbs up, right? Isn't that kind of the end of the regulatory story?
That's a great question, and it's a common misconception.
Okay.
While that initial FDA approval is definitely a big deal, regulatory agencies like the FDA, they don't just give a stamp of approval and walk away.
They're not just hands off.
No, they have a very active oversight role, even after a drug's on the market.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just some random process. It's actually built on a very strong legal framework.
Oh, so it's like written into the law that they have to keep an eye on things.
Exactly. And this all started way back in 1906 with the Pure Food and Drug Act.
Okay, the early 1900s.
Yeah. That law was mainly about preventing companies from mislabeling food and drugs.
So making sure things were actually what they said they were.
Right. Preventing blatant fraud.
Okay, that makes sense.
Then came a really pivotal moment in 1938 with the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act.
I've heard of that one.
This was a landmark piece of legislation.
Yeah.
And it came about after a really tragic event.
Oh.
There were a number of deaths linked to a poorly formulated sulfanilamide medication.
Oh, wow.
And that really shook things up.
Yeah, I can imagine.
This new law made it mandatory for drug manufacturers to prove that their drug was safe before they could sell it to people.
So they couldn't just put something out there and wait for people to get sick.
No. The initial focus shifted very strongly towards safety.
Safety first.
Exactly. But there was still another big step to come.
Oh, what was that?
It wasn't until 1962, with the Kefauver-Harris drug amendments, that proving a drug actually worked became a legal requirement.
Oh, so before that, they didn't actually have to show that the drug did what it was supposed to do.
Right, they just had to show that it wasn't going to immediately harm people.
That's kind of wild.
It is when you think about it.
Wow.
And these 1962 amendments were largely spurred by the Thalidomide tragedy in Europe.
Oh, yeah, that was a horrible situation.
It was devastating. Thousands of babies were born with severe birth defects because their mothers had taken thalidomide during pregnancy.
Awful.
Absolutely terrible. And it really woke the world up to the need for stricter drug regulations.
So this wasn't just an American thing.
No, this had global implications.
Wow.
So these amendments, they introduced the requirement for submitting an IND, an investigational new drug application,
Okay.
before you could even start testing a new drug in humans.
So that's like a permission slip to start clinical trials.
Exactly. And another key element was informed consent from the people participating in those trials.
Right, so they had to understand the risks involved.
Absolutely. So you can see how these historical events have shaped the way we regulate drugs today.
Yeah, we've gone from just preventing companies from outright lying about their products to making sure they're both safe and effective.
Exactly, and that's a huge shift.
It really is.
And it's important to remember that there are separate laws specifically for biologic
Oh,
products.
right. Like vaccines and gene therapies.
Yeah, exactly. Those are really complex products, and they have their own set of regulations.
Okay, what are some of the key laws for biologics?
Well, there's the Biologics Control Act of 1902 and the Public Health Service Act of 1944.
Okay, so we've got laws covering regular drugs and separate laws covering biologics.
Right, and we've also seen a big change in the regulatory agencies themselves.
Oh, how so?
Back in the early days, we had the Bureau of Drugs and the Bureau of Biologics,
Okay.
but as our scientific understanding and regulatory processes became more sophisticated, we moved towards more specialized centers.
I see. So kind of like how medical specialties evolved over time.
Exactly, a good analogy.
Okay.
So now we have the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, or CDER, which mainly handles small molecule drugs.
Okay.
And we have the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, or CBER for biologics.
So more specialized expertise.
Precisely. It's all part of this evolution towards a more nuanced and science-driven approach to drug regulation.
Okay, so we've talked about the historical context and how these agencies came to be. Now let's get into the specifics of what this ongoing oversight actually looks like in practice.
All right, let's dive in.
What kind of rules and regulations do pharmaceutical companies have to deal with after their drug is already out there being used by patients?
Well, big one is how they communicate about their prescription drugs.
Okay, so like advertising and marketing.
Exactly. The regulations are very clear that for any drug that was approved after October 10, 1962,
Okay.
or for animal drugs after August 1st, 1969,
Right.
their advertisements can't promote or even suggest any uses that aren't specifically laid out in the approved product labeling.
Oh, so they can't just start saying, oh, yeah, this drug also cures the common cold if that's not what it was originally approved for.
Exactly right. That's what's called off-label promotion, and it's a big no-no in advertising.
Okay, makes sense.
And it's not just about what they say, but also what they don't say.
Wow.
These advertisements, they also have to very clearly present information about specific side effects and contraindications.
Right, so like when you shouldn't use the drug?
Exactly. And all that has to be spelled out in the official labeling.
So it's all about transparency.
Absolutely giving doctors and patients a balanced picture of the drug's benefits and risks.
Okay, I see.
And here's another layer of oversight.
Okay.
If the FDA has serious concerns about the safety of a particular drug,
Okay.
and they think the company isn't doing a good enough job of communicating those risks,
Right.
they can actually step in and require the company to get prior approval for any advertising materials before they can be released.
So the FDA can basically say, hold on, we need to review this before you show it to anyone.
Exactly. They have the power to control the narrative, especially when patient safety is on the line.
Wow, that's pretty powerful.
It is. It shows how seriously they take their responsibility to protect public health.
Okay, so that's advertising, but what about other aspects of post-approval monitoring?
Well, another really important piece is what we call post-marketing studies, or sometimes phase 4 trials.
I've heard of those, but remind me what those are all about.
So you know how drugs go through those rigorous clinical trials before they can get approved?
Yeah, phase IM3.
Exactly. Those are crucial for establishing safety and efficacy in a controlled setting. But once a drug is approved and starts being used by a much wider and more diverse group of people.
Right, in the real world.
Exactly. That's when these post-marketing studies come in.
Okay.
They're basically ongoing surveillance studies that continue to gather data on the drug's safety and effectiveness over a much longer period of time.
Oh, so it's like long-term monitoring.
Precisely. And this real-world data is incredibly valuable. It can reveal things that might not have been apparent in those initial pre-approval trials.
Okay, that makes sense.
You know, the researcher Alan Hackshaw, he's written extensively about the importance of post-market surveillance.
Oh, yeah, I think I read some of his work.
He really emphasizes that this ongoing monitoring is a vital part of the entire drug life cycle. It's not just something you do as an afterthought.
So even after all those years of research and development, they're still collecting data and learning more about the drug.
Absolutely. And a big part of this post-market surveillance is the reporting of adverse events.
Okay, so like when someone experiences a side effect.
Exactly. Healthcare professionals,
Yeah.
patients, even the drug companies themselves, they're all required to report any unexpected or serious side effects that occur after a drug is on the market.
So it's like a collective effort to keep track of what's happening.
It is, and the FDA plays a key role in investigating these reports.
Okay.
They need to figure out if there's a real link between the drug and the side effect, and if so, what needs to be done.
So they're like detectives.
In a way, yeah, they have to gather the evidence, analyze it, and then decide if any action is needed.
Like maybe updating the drug's labeling.
Right, or in some cases, even pulling the drugs from the market if the risks outweigh the benefits.
Wow, so it's a really dynamic process.
It is. It's all about constantly assessing and reassessing the safety profile of a drug as more information becomes available.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. Let's get into those historical examples you mentioned earlier.
Oh, yeah, those are great illustrations of how past challenges have shaped the way we do things today.
So how have these regulatory hurdles and the way they've been handled really influenced the landscape we see now?
Well, two cases stand out as being particularly impactful.
Okay.
The thalidomide story and the more recent experience with Vioxx.
I've definitely heard of those.
Let's start with thalidomide.
Okay.
So back in the late 1950s and early 1960s, thalidomide was widely marketed as a mild sedative,
Okay.
and it was also used to treat morning sickness in pregnant women.
Oh, wow.
It was seen as this wonder drug at the time.
Yeah.
But tragically, it turned out to have devastating consequences.
Right. I know this one doesn't end well.
No, it doesn't.
Come on.
It was later discovered that thalidomide caused severe birth defects in thousands of babies.
It's just heartbreaking.
It really is. And it was a major wake-up call for the entire pharmaceutical industry.
So what happened after that?
Well, this horrific event, it really pushed for much stronger drug regulations worldwide.
Like a global response?
Yeah, and in the United States, the most significant change was the 1962 Kefauver-Harris amendments that we talked about earlier.
Right. Those were the ones that brought in the requirement for demonstrating both safety and efficacy.
Exactly. And they also made preclinical safety testing much more rigorous. So they really clamped down on the whole process.
They did. The thalidomide case made it crystal clear that thorough and comprehensive safety evaluation had to be done before a drug was widely used.
Especially in vulnerable populations like pregnant women.
Absolutely. It was a game changer. It completely shifted how regulatory agencies and drug companies approached drug safety.
So that was a really big lesson learned the hard way.
It was, and the impact of those changes is still felt today.
Okay, what about Vioxx? That's a more recent example, right?
Yes, Vioxx was a pain reliever.
Okay.
It belonged to a class of drugs called KOX2 inhibitors.
Right.
It was approved in the late 1990s, and it was initially seen as a really promising alternative to traditional NSAIDs.
Like ibuprofen and things like that. Exactly. Vioxx was thought to have fewer gastrointestinal side effects.
Oh, so easier on the stomach.
Right. But as more and more patients started using Vioxx and more data started coming in from post-market surveillance and additional clinical trials,
Oh, yeah.
some worrisome trends started to emerge.
Oh, no, what happened?
Well, there were increasing concerns about an increased risk of cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes.
Oh, wow.
And these risks seem to be associated with long-term use of Vioxx.
So it wasn't something that showed up immediately.
Right. It took some time for these signals to become apparent.
Then what happened then?
In 2004, the manufacturer decided to voluntarily withdraw Vioxx from the market.
They pulled the plug.
They did. They felt it was the most responsible thing to do, given the accumulating safety concerns.
That must have been a tough decision.
It was a huge decision, with major implications for the company and for patients who were relying on the drug.
So what did we learn from the Vioxx case?
Well, it really highlighted the importance of continuous post-market surveillance and how our understanding of a drug's risk-benefit profile can change over time.
Yeah, it's not like you just figure everything out before approval and then you're done.
Not at all. It's an ongoing process.
So even after all those clinical trials before approval, there's still a chance that rare but serious side effects can show up once the drug is being used more widely.
Exactly. And the Vioxx case really emphasized the need for qualified experts to continuously evaluate all the available clinical experience
Okay.
to make those tough judgments about whether a drug's benefits are still outweighing its risks.
So it's about constantly weighing the good against the bad.
Precisely, and being willing to adjust course if the balance tips too far in the wrong direction.
So both thalidomide and Vioxx, they really highlight why navigating these post-approval challenges is so crucial.
Absolutely. They underscore the need for vigilance, for careful monitoring, and for a real commitment to patient safety.
Okay, so we've seen how important this all is, and we've got a sense of how things have evolved over time.
Right.
Now, let's get practical.
All right, let's talk strategy.
What are some of the key things that pharmaceutical companies do to successfully navigate these post-approval hurdles?
Well, a lot of it comes down to having a rock-solid foundation.
Okay.
And that foundation is built on an unwavering commitment to compliance.
So following the rules.
Yeah. But it's more than that. It's about making compliance part of your DNA.
Okay.
It's about constantly striving to meet the standards set by good manufacturing practices, or GMP.
Right, GMP. I've heard that before.
It's a big deal.
Okay, remind me what's covered under GMP.
Well, it's a whole set of regulations that are detailed in Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations,
Okay.
specifically Part 211.
All right, 21 CFR Part 211.
This covers so many different things.
Like what?
It's everything from making sure your manufacturing facilities are spotless and well-maintained,
Okay.
to having really rigorous quality control procedures for every single step of the production process.
So every single ingredient, every piece of equipment, every step along the way has to meet these standards.
Exactly. And you have to be able to prove that you're meeting those standards consistently over time.
So it's not just about doing it right once, it's about doing it right every single time.
Right, and documenting everything.
Oh, right. Paperwork.
Exactly. GMP also requires you to keep meticulous records for all your labeling and packaging materials.
So you know exactly what went into each batch and what's written on every label.
Exactly. It's all about traceability and accountability.
Okay, I see.
And, of course, you need to have robust testing procedures in place.
Right, to make sure the drug is actually what it's supposed to be.
Exactly. And there are regulations that specify those testing requirements. Like 21 CFR Part 212, that one gets into the nitty-gritty of making sure every batch of the drug meets its quality specs.
Okay, so they're not just taking your word for it. They want to see the data.
Right. The proof is in the pudding, or in this case, the testing results.
Okay, what else is there?
We also have to keep detailed records of any complaints you receive.
Oh, right, like if someone says they had a bad reaction.
Yeah, or if there's a problem with the packaging or anything like that.
Okay.
And you also have to keep track of any product recalls.
Right, if you have to pull a batch off the market.
Exactly, and you have to document the investigations you conduct in response to any of these issues.
So it's like a whole system for identifying and addressing problems.
It is, and all of this is mandated by various regulations like 21 CFR 211 and others.
Okay, so this emphasis on quality control documentation and having a system for dealing with problems, that seems like a really fundamental part of staying compliant.
Absolutely, it's the bedrock of everything else.
Okay, what other key strategies are there?
Well, another really important one is proactive risk mitigation.
Okay, so trying to prevent problems before they happen.
Exactly. It's about systematically identifying, assessing, and minimizing potential risks throughout the entire life cycle of the drug.
So from the very early stages of development all the way through to post-market surveillance.
Exactly. And a lot of this starts with those preclinical studies.
Right, the ones they do in animals before testing in humans.
Exactly. Those preclinical pharmacology and toxicology studies and the increasing use of toxicogenomics.
Okay.
Those can help identify potential safety risks really early on.
And there are resources that guide this process, right?
Yeah, there are. There's a great book called The Process of New Drug Discovery and Development that goes into a lot of detail about this.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
It's a good one. And then there are also tools like fault tree analysis.
Fault tree analysis? What's that?
It's a method for evaluating potential points of failure in a system.
Okay.
It can be applied to manufacturing processes or other critical systems to help you understand the root causes of potential problems.
Oh, so it's like a way of thinking through all the things that could go wrong and figuring out how to prevent them.
Exactly. And it's discussed in detail in the Certified Pharmaceutical GMP Professional Handbook.
Another one for the reading list.
Yep. So you can see how this proactive approach to risk management is essential for preventing issues before they even arise.
Right. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Okay, what else do we need to know about navigating these challenges?
Well, one more crucial element is what I call regulatory adaptability.
Okay, so being able to roll with the punches.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The regulatory landscape is constantly evolving.
Oh, I bet.
New scientific knowledge is always emerging, and regulatory priorities can shift over time.
Makes sense.
So companies really need to stay flexible and be ready to adapt.
Okay, so how do they do that?
Well, good communication is key.
Okay, communication with her.
With the FDA.
Makes sense.
Maintaining open and clear communication between the drug sponsor and the FDA is absolutely crucial throughout the entire drug life cycle.
Okay.
There are some great resources that talk about this, like developing solid oral dosage forms.
Okay.
And there are opportunities for companies to have meetings with the FDA even before they submit an IND.
Oh, so they can get some early feedback and guidance?
Exactly. And that dialogue continues after the drug is approved.
I see.
There's also this concept of adaptive clinical trial designs.
Oh, yeah, we talked about those in our series on clinical trials.
Exactly. Those allow for modifications to ongoing studies based on the data that's being collected.
Right, so they can adjust the trial if they need to.
Exactly, and that can be really helpful for responding to potential safety signals that pop up in the post-approval period.
Okay, so it's all about being proactive, communicative, and adaptable.
You got it. Those are the keys to success in this ever-changing world of drug regulation.
It really sounds like it takes a lot of effort and expertise to navigate all this.
It does, but remember, those underlying principles of pharmaceutical science, they play a vital role too.
Oh, yeah, how so?
Well, having the deep understanding of the drug's fundamental properties,
Okay.
things like its dissolution rate and bioavailability.
Right, those are important concepts in pharmacokinetics.
Exactly, and we've talked about those in detail in our previous deep dives.
We have.
Understanding those concepts can be absolutely crucial if any unexpected issues come up after the drug is approved.
Okay, so even the basic science stuff can be really important for solving complex problems.
Exactly, and this is especially true for solid oral dosage forms.
Oh, right, like pills and tablets.
Yeah, those are the most common types of drugs, and sometimes even seemingly simple things like reducing the particle size of a poorly soluble drug
Okay.
can significantly improve how well it's absorbed.
Oh, so it's not just about the drug itself, it's about how it's formulated.
Exactly. The formulation can have a huge impact on how the drug behaves in the body.
Okay, I see.
And then there's also the importance of stability testing.
Right, making sure the drug doesn't degrade over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You need to make sure that the drug product maintains its quality and potency over its intended shelf life.
So it stays effective and safe.
Right. And that's where those stability studies come in.
Okay, so it's not just about how the drug works in the body, it's also about how it's made and how it holds up over time.
Precisely. And then, of course, we can't forget about pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics.
Right, those are all about how the drug moves through the body and what it does once it gets there.
Exactly. And a thorough understanding of those concepts is essential for investigating any unexpected side effects or drug interactions that might only become apparent once the drug is being used by a lot of different people.
Right, because everyone's different and they might be taking other medications.
Exactly. And those interactions can be really complex.
We've seen that in our deep dives on drug interactions.
Yeah, we've explored those in quite a bit of detail.
We have.
And sometimes you just don't see those interactions until the drug is out there in the real world being used in all sorts of different combinations.
So it's like a puzzle that keeps getting more and more pieces.
It is, and it takes a lot of careful observation and analysis to put it all together.
It's amazing how everything is interconnected.
It really is.
From the initial design of the drug to its formulation to its behavior in the body and then the ongoing monitoring and adaptation, it's all part of this continuous cycle of ensuring safety and efficacy.
Exactly. It's a never-ending process.
So to sum it all up for our listeners today,
Okay.
our deep dive into post-approval regulatory challenges has shown us that a drug's journey is far from over once it gets that initial approval.
Right. The story doesn't end there.
It takes ongoing vigilance, robust risk management strategies, and a real willingness to adapt as new information comes to light.
That's the key takeaway.
We've looked at some impactful historical cases like the Thalidomide tragedy.
Right. A real turning point in drug regulation.
It showed us just how important safety is and how those pre-approval studies are absolutely crucial.
Absolutely.
And we talked about the Vioxx situation.
Yeah, that one really emphasized the importance of continuous post-market surveillance and how our understanding of a drug's risks and benefits can change over time.
Exactly. So those examples, along with all the intricate regulatory frameworks and the scientific principles we've discussed,
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
they all highlight just how complex it is to ensure the long-term safety and effectiveness of medications once they're out there being used by patients. It's a dynamic field that's always evolving.
And that brings us to our final thought for today.
Right.
Given how incredibly complex drug development is, and how there's always a chance that unexpected problems can arise even after a drug has been rigorously tested and approved,
Right.
what do you think is the single most important thing for ensuring that the medications we all rely on are safe and effective in the long run?
That's a tough one.
It is.
There's no easy answer.
Right.
Is it about having even stricter regulations before a drug is allowed on the market?
Okay.
Or maybe it's about having a more comprehensive system for monitoring drugs after they're already being used?
Okay.
Or could it be something else entirely?
Like what?
Like maybe we need more transparency with data or better communication between all the different stakeholders.
Those are all really important considerations.
They are.
It's a complex issue with no simple solutions,
That is.
but it's something we all need to be thinking about.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, it's about ensuring the safety and well-being of patients. And that's what really matters.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a fascinating conversation.
I agree. I've enjoyed it.
I hope you've all learned something new and that you'll continue to explore these important issues.
Yeah, stay curious, everyone.
Until next time.